Hola, me llamo Cass. Hello, my name is Cass. Y hoy vamos a hablar sobre esta pintura. And today we're going to be talking about this painting. Uh, hay muchos celulares en su cuerpo que protegeron su cuerpo de virus o bacteria o otras cosas. So there's many cells in your body that protect it from bacteria and viruses and other things like that. And so today we're going to be talking about some of those. Para empezar, tengo algunos hechos sobre el tracto respiratorio y los peligros de vapear. So to start, I have some facts about the respiratory tract and some dangers of vaping. Um, carbon dioxide and oxygen can only be exchanged through very small, tiny little air sacs and that are in a single layer. So it's really important that there's a thin layer. And we're not looking at that here. We are looking at the lining of our trachea. But I just was going to give you guys the background that our alveoli are lined with a very, very thin layer of just single cells called simple squamous epithelium. And so these tiny microscopic air sacs increase the surface area of our lungs to be about 500 to 800 square feet. And that's a lot, right? That's the size of a really tiny apartment, right? Because our houses are usually about like 2,000, 3,000 square feet. So that's like pretty large considering your lungs are like, what, the size of something inside of you, which is pretty cool. So en español, el dióxido de carbono y el oxígeno solo pueden intercambiarse a través de una fina capa de epitelio uh, escamoso, squamous epithelium, uh, epitelio escamoso simple en los alveolos, sacos de aire microscopios que aumentan la superficie, la superficie de los pulmones a 500 a 800 pies cuadrados. So they increase the surface area to be 500 to 800 square feet, which is a lot. Es muy mucho. Y que tenemos en la pantalla, so what we have on the screen is our trachea. Es nuestros trachea. So the airway of the lower respiratory tract, which includes your trachea, your bronchi, and your bronchioles, which I know you can't see what I'm doing on my chest because I wanted you guys to be able to see the picture. But those are lined with a single layered, so it's same kind of just one cell layer, except this cell layer is a little bit thicker because it deals with a little bit more turbulence, but it's still a single layer, and it's important that it's that single layer so that it's not too thick for things to be able to move around and things like that. So it's lined with a single layered, pseudo-stratified, ciliated columnar epithelium in a healthy individual. So what that means is that um, this epithelium here, that it's pseudo-stratified, meaning that you can tell that the nuclei are at multiple levels. So like the nuclei are these little purple things, and so they look like there's multiple layers, but it's pseudo, so it's fakely stratified. So it's not actually stratified; it's just one layer. And so these are lined with these little hair cells called cilia that we can kind of see along the edge of our cells here. And so those are really important for moving mucus out of our lungs, which we'll talk about in a second. But en español, los vías respiratorias del tracto respiratorio inferior, incluyendo la tráquea, los bronquios y los bronquiolos. están revisadas con un epíteto columnar ciliado pseudoestratificado in un individual sano, in a healthy individual. So, what we can also see here are, so we have a mucus gland here, but let me see if I can find a goblet cell somewhere on our screen. I think there might be a goblet cell underneath here, because that looks pretty clear, or maybe right there. But mucus secreting goblet cells in the epithelial layer with the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, which I know all of these are really big words, but I think that it's very interesting. So in that layer, there's mucus secreting goblet cells that the mucus actually is able to trap bacteria and viruses and other air particles that we inhale. And then these particles are then carried by those cilia, and they go like this, and they push that mucus into our esophagus so that we swallow them, and then our stomach acid digests all those bacteria, viruses, and other things so that they don't end up hurting us. But every so often that doesn't work, and so we get sick, right? We get respiratory infections like the flu, or most recently an example is COVID, right? So en español, las células de Goblet secreta el moco en la capa epitelial del tracto y atrapan bacterias, virus y otras partículas del aire inhaladas en la moco que secretan. So they trap those things in the mucus that they secrete. Las partículas son transportadas a través de los cilios de la escalera mucociliar para ser desechados por ambiente acídico del estómago. So, these goblet cells carry the mucus not the goblet cells, the cilia carry the mucus with their little finger-like things here, and they push it towards the stomach so that it can be so that it can digest all those bad particles that we inhaled. Y entonces, as the airways become damaged by chronic use of these lovely little vape devices, that this layer of pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium starts to get damaged. So their cilia, those little hairs on the top, those start to fall off. And those are really important to be able to move the mucus out of our lungs. And so our cilia falling off is kind of, you can observe that by someone who coughs because they smoke a lot, right? They cough because they have a lot of phlegm buildup because they can't get rid of it through their natural mechanisms because their cilia are destroyed, basically. And then another thing that happens is that we have this transition from there being cilia to no cilia, but there's also another transition from there being a single layer of pseudostratified cells to being multiple layers of little squamous cells. So this is a stratified squamous epithelium. So we'll take a look at the epithelial lining in some of our other cavities, like our oral cavity, and kind of look at how that's a little different here. And I apologize for all the loading. And hopefully you can still hear me a-okay. But here we have our stratified squamous epithelium that's actually making up our tongue. And so our tongue deals with a lot of abrasion, which makes sense why we would have a lot of layers of cells if we're constantly inhaling smoke and kind of damaging our cells, so it wants to protect itself. But that's not really good for it, and that can actually lead to certain types of cancers.